Well, it's a sort of a weird story. My mom and dad, I already had a brother that was in Vietnam, and he went through the tet offense in '68. And I graduated high school in '69. And back then they had the draft, and my number was fixing to come up, and my mom and dad didn't want me to go and get drafted. So if you were enrolled in college, you would be deferred. I wanted to be a Marine like my brother was, but they didn't want nothing to do with it. So I was enrolled in dental college. I was going to be a dentist, of all things. The dental school came and found me, and what's really weird, I had the worst grades in high school that anybody could have. I failed every subject, but all the aptitude tests I took, I was above the range. And they looked at that. They didn't look at that I skipped school all the time and flunked every class and went to summer school and made it all up. Well, anyway, I had a best friend, which he's still my best friend. He joined the Navy as soon as he graduated in 1968. And he came home for Christmas of 1968. And I wasn't doing anything. I was supposed to start dental college at the end of January of '69. Well, he came home for a week for Christmas, and him and me went out partying every day and every night and stayed drunk. Somewhere along the line, he took me to the Navy recruiting office, and back then, if you were alive and breathing, they took you. Well, somewhere along the line, I signed the paperwork that I joined the Navy. Didn't even know it. Had no idea. And I think it was somewhere around the 10th of January, a letter comes from the military. I can't remember exactly what that was called, and it was addressed to me, but I never got mail. And my mother seen it and seen it was coming from the Navy. So she opened it up, and it showed in there that I was supposed to report to Great Lakes, Illinois on January 16th. Well, anyway, she calls me and she said, "What did you do?" I said, What? She said, "You joined the military." I said, I looked at her, I said, "No, I did not join the military." She said, "It shows right here that you joined." I said, "I didn't join no military." And I said, "I ain't going to be in no Navy." I said, "I'll be on no ship." So she took me down to the Navy recruiting office, gave that, it was a chief, the Riot Act. And all he said, "Mrs. Perry, he signed the documents. He's ours." So January 16th, I went off to Great Lakes, Illinois with an attitude. I didn't want to be in the Navy. So I didn't do a thing that the Navy wanted you to do. I didn't march for them. I didn't do calisthenics. I did absolutely nothing that they said. They would beat me. And I'd tell them, I said, "I don't want to be in the Navy." I said, "I want to be in the Marines." And they said, "You join the Navy," And I said, we'd go off for marches, and I'd just walk. Everybody'd be marching, I'd just walk, the hands down the side, whatever, and have that chief hit me in the back of the head, tell me straighten up, do this, do that. And I didn't do a thing. 8556 was my military number. And that had to be stamped on all your clothing because everybody dressed the same. All that ugly blue uniforms. And so they would give you this pad that had your name and your number on it, and you were supposed to, put it under your lapels and all that for when they came out and washed it, they would get back to you. Well, I just stamped it on the front of my chest. Couldn't get it off. It was permanent. All my name and numbers were upside down here and there, and they just didn't know what to do with me. And finally, one night, I had a lieutenant come in, and he said I was going to stand guard duty. And I looked at him, guard duty? What do you mean guard duty? He said, "You're going to be a sentry. and he had a wooden gun, and he said, "This is going to be your piece." And I looked at that thing and I said, "What am I supposed to do with a wooden gun?" He said, "We can't give you a real gun with ammunition." He said, "You're not even, out of training." And I said, "Well, I'm not going to stand no guard duty with a wooden gun." So, he gives me the riot act and says, "I'll be here at 6:30 to pick you." It was winter time. And I think it was January, this was beginning the 1st of March. And he takes me to my post, and this is where I was supposed to be from midnight to 5 a.m., whatever. And he walked off. I laid that wooden gun down, walked back to my barracks, and crawled in my bunk. Well, he made rounds an hour or two later, and I wasn't there. The wooden gun laying on the ground, and he comes back to the barracks, and I'd already fell asleep, and the chief and him shook me out of my bed, and he gave me the riot act. He said, "This is a court-martial offense. We're going to find out what to do with you." Well, they told me I was incorrigible, and they were going to give me a general discharge out of the Navy. Wasn't dishonorable. I just wasn't what they were looking for, and it wasn't what I was looking for. So there was, I think there was 29 of us in a holding company waiting for general discharge, because they were just like I was. From where I was raised, it was pretty bad. Everybody, gangs, and it was it was a rough environment. So all these other guys came from New York, New Jersey, and all these other kind of different places. That same thing. They weren't going to be in the Navy. So we were sitting waiting for our discharge papers, and at that time, UDT and the Navy SEALs were getting pretty involved in Vietnam, and they were getting wounded. They were losing guys. They weren't actually getting killed, but they would get wounded enough where they weren't going to be in the service anymore. But they tried to keep 150 on the West Coast and 150 on the East Coast at all times. Well, the numbers were dwindling. So they were ramping up, and you had to volunteer to go to UDT training. And you had to take them, they would take them off of ships. They would show them the program, and they would volunteer, and they'd send you off to either Virginia or Coronado. Well, we were still in that holding company, and Chief, which was West Coast SEAL, he'd already been in for 20-some years, and he had the right idea to go to Great Lakes. There was 4,000 sailors up there going through training. And he said, "We'll get them right out of boot camp." So he goes up there, and of course, he was up there for about a week or so before he showed the whole program to all 4,000 Navy guys up there. Well, out of that 4,000, I think there was only 11 that said they would try it. And he said that wasn't a big enough class. He said, because they were going to do a boot camp at Great Lakes. He said, we have an 85% dropout rate, and we said we can't do this program for 2 or 3 guys. So the commander up there said, well, he said, all we have is these misfits that we're kicking out. He said, let me talk to him. So he comes there and he shows what we had to do. There was none of this square to wear haircuts. They didn't care what you looked like. You had starch greens. You didn't wear any Navy clothing, none of them blues with bell bottoms and all that stuff. And they showed it to us 29 guys, and all 29 of us volunteered. Instead of getting kicked out, we went to California. Started off with a class of 124. From the Great, I think 23 or 24 of us from Great Lakes went to California. And we had 124 in our class, and only 24 of us graduated, and 21 of them were from Great Lakes. I don't know if that's what I was destined to be, but I fit in. I just love. The whole thing is even though they needed UDT and Navy SEALs, the instructor's job was to make you quit. And they didn't care if all 124 of you quit. That was their job. So, I mean, they had classes of only 6 graduating. You know, start off at 100, 150, and only 6 make it. And the 24 of us graduated out of class 52. And that was my class number. That was the 52nd class. And, you know, they started off with class 1. Class 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 were all older, demolition qualified out of the fleet. They made up the first Navy SEALs. And in 60, I think 65, 66, some of the classes that were going through Virginia and Coronado started graduating, and then they started going to Vietnam. If I remember right, there was only 190 of us that went to Vietnam out of the Navy SEALs.